Kayla Nightwind's head throbbed as she slowly regained consciousness. The last thing she remembered was celebrating with her human crewmates after a successful mission. They had landed on a distant planet, completed their objectives, and made their way back to their ship for a well-earned rest. They had gathered in the ship's lounge, and as the night wore on, the mood grew lighter. Laughter filled the room as they shared drinks. Kayla, though usually reserved, had decided to try a drink she had never tasted before, a potent human liquor that everyone was raving about. But something had gone terribly wrong. As the alcohol slid down her throat, it didn't settle as she had expected. Instead, a burning sensation spread across her body, making her skin feel like it was on fire. It wasn't like anything she had ever experienced. Her heart raced, and a strange ache began to pulse through her veins. She had tried to ignore it at first, but the feeling only grew stronger, making her stomach churn and her head spin. Her vision blurred, and the room seemed to tilt as she swayed, trying to keep her balance. Her crew had noticed her sudden discomfort, and the next thing Kayla knew, she was lying on a cold medbay bed, the lights above her blindingly bright. She winced as she forced her eyes open, trying to focus. She could feel the weight of someone standing over her. The face of Dr. Garrett, the ship's medic, loomed into view. His weathered face was etched with concern as he looked down at her, his hands moving swiftly over his medical equipment. "What happened?" Kayla croaked, her voice sounding weak and scratchy. "You had a bad reaction to the liquor," Dr. Garrett replied, his voice calm but carrying an edge of uncertainty. "Your species' biology doesn't react well to it. I've never seen a reaction like this before." Kayla tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness hit her, forcing her back down. She felt her body tremble as the strange heat surged through her again, making her feel vulnerable and exposed. She had been trained to handle almost anything in space, but this was beyond her control. As she tried to gather her thoughts, Dr. Garrett ran his hand through his short, graying hair and looked at her with concern in his eyes. "Kayla," he said, "there's more to it than just the liquor. I've done a scan and it seems your reaction is connected to the performance enhancement serum that we all received before the mission." Kayla's mind raced. The serum was a standard, part of every crew member's routine. It was supposed to enhance physical abilities, strength, stamina, reflexes. Everyone on the ship, human or otherwise, had taken it, but she knew something wasn't right. Her people, the Xanthians, were similar to humans in many ways, but their physiology was unique, and clearly, this combination was doing something to her that no one could have predicted. The serum is interacting with your physiology in a way that is causing unpredictable results, Dr. Garrett continued, his voice lower now. It's creating a physical response that your body isn't able to control. Kayla's mind flashed to the feelings she had been struggling with since she'd arrived in the med bay. The ache inside her, burning and relentless, the heat that flooded her body, it was all too familiar. It wasn't the first time she had felt something like this. In fact, she knew exactly what it was. Her species' mating cycle. But this was something entirely different. It was too intense, too overwhelming. It's triggered a heightened arousal response, Dr. Garrett said, his voice softening as he looked away, clearly uncomfortable with the nature of the words he was saying. Your hormones are off the charts. If we don't address this soon, you could go into shock. Kayla's heart skipped a beat. Shock. The word echoed in her mind as she tried to process what he was saying. It was clear to her now that the serum combined with the alcohol had caused a situation she couldn't control. Not only was she in physical distress, but she was also trapped in a deeply embarrassing situation, alone in a ship filled with humans, with her body responding in ways that she couldn't explain, let alone deal with in front of them. "What can I do?" Kayla asked, her voice shaky but determined to find a solution. She was no stranger to challenges, but this one was different. It was more personal, more vulnerable. Dr. Garrett hesitated before speaking again. "There's a sedative I can give you to help with the symptoms, but that won't fix everything. The only real way to relieve this is to, well, you would need to find someone to help you through it." Kayla's face flushed with a mix of anger and shame. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The thought of asking any of her crew members for help with something so intimate and personal was unbearable. The idea of letting anyone see her in such a vulnerable state made her stomach churn, but she knew deep down that she was running out of options. "I need some time to think," Kayla said, her voice tight as she closed her eyes and tried to steady her breathing. She had to figure out how to deal with this on her own. She had faced enemies, unknown threats, and life-or-death situations. But this was different. She had never felt so helpless, so exposed. Dr. Garrett nodded, sensing the storm of emotions running through her. "Of course," he said gently. "I'll give you some privacy. Hit the call button if you need anything." As the door to the medbay slid closed behind him, Kayla lay there alone with her thoughts. The fire within her was not just physical, it was emotional too. Embarrassment, fear, and an overwhelming sense of powerlessness. She had always prided herself on being in control, but now in this moment she felt like she was losing everything. But Kayla Nightwind was no quitter. She was resourceful, determined, and strong. This might have been the most vulnerable moment of her life, but she would find a way to handle it. She always did. The question was, could she overcome the fire within her before it consumed everything she had worked so hard to build? As the ship hummed quietly around her, Kayla knew that she had no choice but to fight. Fight to regain control over her body, her mind, and her pride. And maybe, just maybe, find a way to survive this ordeal without losing herself in the process. Kayla sat up slowly, trying to ignore the dull ache in her body that had not subsided. She glanced around her dimly lit quarters, the cold metal walls of the ship offering no comfort. The quiet hum of the engines was the only sound that kept her company. She couldn't escape the overwhelming sense of discomfort that surrounded her. She had always prided herself on being in control, on being the one who could face any challenge no matter how daunting. But this was different. Her mind raced as she replayed the events of the past few hours. The alcohol, the reaction, the overwhelming heat that had surged through her veins, the desperate need she couldn't shake. Dr. Garrett's words echoed in her mind. The only way to truly relieve this is to find someone to help you through it. The thought of asking anyone for help, of revealing her vulnerability in such an intimate way, made her stomach turn. But she couldn't ignore the fire inside her. The serum, combined with the alcohol, had turned her body into a ticking time bomb, and she needed to find a solution before it was too late. Kayla rose to her feet, her legs unsteady as she made her way to the small, functional mirror in the corner of her room. Her reflection startled her. The flush on her blue skin, the way her chest rose and fell with each labored breath, all reminded her of what she was going through. She was a warrior, she thought to herself. I can control this. I will control this. She closed her eyes, willing herself to focus, but the heat inside her only intensified. She knew she had to find a way to fight it without anyone's help. The desperation in her mind started to mix with something else, something she hadn't expected. There was a part of her, a deep instinctual part that felt a sense of yearning. The way her body craved relief was unnatural, and yet it felt as though it had always been there, lying dormant, waiting to be awakened. It was more than physical need. It was primal. And she hated it. Get a grip, Kayla muttered to herself, running her hands through her long, tangled hair. The scent of sweat and the faint traces of alcohol on her skin only reminded her of how far she had fallen from the image of control she had worked so hard to maintain. She had to leave her quarters. She couldn't stand being alone in this tiny space anymore. The walls seemed to close in on her as the burning sensation refused to let up. It was like she was suffocating, but not from a lack of air. No, it was from the fire that seemed to grow hotter the longer she resisted it. Her mind drifted to Captain Aiden Brooks. He was her superior, her commanding officer. She had known him for years now, and while they had always shared mutual respect, there was something else there, something unspoken. They had crossed paths countless times during missions, but this situation was something neither of them could have prepared for. She had always admired him, but she had never allowed herself to acknowledge the attraction that lingered beneath the surface. And now, with the serum affecting her judgment, that attraction burned brighter than ever before. She couldn't involve him. She couldn't let herself lose control. And yet, as she found herself standing in front of her door ready to leave her quarters, she realized that the thought of being near him was both terrifying and comforting. She couldn't explain it, but she knew one thing. She was on the edge of something dangerous, and she had no idea if she could hold herself back from crossing that line. As Kayla stepped into the corridor, the cold air hit her skin, providing temporary relief from the heat that clung to her. She moved quickly, almost instinctively, her boots clicking against the metal floor as she walked down the narrow hallway. Her thoughts were clouded, but there was a single, sharp focus in her mind. She had to fix this. She had to regain control of her body before it was too late. The medical bay was her destination, but a part of her hesitated. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She had never asked for help before. She had never needed to. But now, the weight of her condition, the heat in her body, the growing desire, it was too much to carry on her own. Kayla rounded a corner, and there, standing in front of her, was Commander Jonah Ferris, her second in command. He was tall, with dark hair and sharp features, his eyes a soft shade of brown that seemed to see through everything. His presence in the corridor was unanticipated, and she froze for a moment as their eyes met. He was clearly surprised to see her out of her quarters, and his expression shifted from concern to confusion. "Kayla?" Jonah said, his voice low. "Is everything all right?" Her heart skipped a beat. She couldn't let him see her like this. Not now. Not in this state. She could feel the blush rising in her cheeks, her body's response to his mere presence making the ache inside her even more unbearable. She bit her lip, trying to steady her breathing. "I'm fine," she lied, her voice hoarse. "I just needed some air." Jonah didn't buy it. He studied her for a moment, his gaze flicking over her flushed skin and the way she stood a little too rigidly. "Kayla, what's going on?" he asked, taking a step closer. "You look—" He trailed off, clearly unsure of how to finish his sentence. Kayla felt the heat rising again, making it impossible to think straight. She wanted to push him away, to run, but instead she stood there, frozen, battling the overwhelming sensations flooding her senses. "I'm fine," Kayla repeated more forcefully this time, taking a step back. "I just need to get back to my quarters. I'm not feeling well." Jonah didn't move, his eyes softening with concern. "If you need someone to talk to..." Kayla's pulse quickened at the implication. She couldn't speak, not without revealing too much. She couldn't let him see her like this. "I'll be fine," she managed to say, though her voice trembled. Without waiting for him to respond, she turned sharply and walked away, not looking back. The moment she rounded the corner, she felt the weight of her emotions crashing down on her again. The fire inside her raged stronger than ever, and she realized she wasn't just trying to regain control of her body. She was fighting something far deeper. Kayla's mind whirred with 1,000 thoughts, but one question stood above them all. What if I can't control this? Kayla felt the steady hum of the ship's engines beneath her feet as she hurried through the narrow corridors, her footsteps echoing in the otherwise quiet hall. The sensation of the fire still burning through her body, gnawing at her from the inside, made every step feel heavier than the last. She reached her quarters in what seemed like a blur, barely noticing the faces of passing crew members as she moved past them. No one seemed to notice the frantic, almost desperate look in her eyes. She had hoped to escape the temptation to break down, but the overwhelming pressure inside her was growing unbearable. The door slid closed behind her with a quiet whoosh, and for a moment, she leaned against it, catching her breath. The cold metal wall was a welcome contrast to the suffocating heat inside her. She had no idea what to do anymore. The idea of asking for help felt like surrender. But the internal fire was relentless, and she could feel herself teetering on the edge of losing control. She quickly moved to her bed, trying to gather her thoughts. There was no easy way out of this. She knew what the solution was, even if she wasn't ready to admit it to herself. The serum had intensified everything inside her, her desires, her feelings, and her urges. It was nothing like anything she had ever experienced before. Kayla, a warrior who had conquered hostile enemies and survived the dangers of space, had never felt this weak. Not like this. Not with her body betraying her every moment. Her eyes flicked to the small, portable communicator on her desk. She had locked herself in here to avoid facing anyone, especially Jonah. His concern had been too much, too close, too personal. But Kayla knew that he wouldn't let her hide forever. She had been under his command for years, and the bond between them was undeniable. It was that bond, the silent connection they shared, that made her feel even more exposed now. Kayla sank onto her bed and stared at the ceiling, trying to steady her breathing. The minutes ticked by, but she couldn't escape the pulsing heat that seemed to radiate from her core. It wasn't just physical anymore. She felt vulnerable in a way she hadn't experienced since the day she joined the military. Her mind wandered back to the brief but intense moment when she had seen Jonah in the corridor. His eyes had searched hers with such concern, and she had felt something stir inside her, a deep, aching need. She wanted him. No, she needed him. Kayla stood abruptly, the sudden movement making her dizzy, but she ignored the warning signs in her body. She couldn't stay here, locked in her own mind, consumed by the fire. She walked to the small window of her quarters, the vast expanse of space stretching out before her. The stars, so far away and so constant, seemed to mock her with their distance. She felt alone, isolated from everything that had once felt familiar. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft chime of her door. Kayla froze. Her heart raced, and her first instinct was to ignore it, to tell whoever it was to leave her alone. But she knew it was only a matter of time before they would come looking for her. She couldn't keep running. "Kayla?" A voice called softly through the door, and she instantly recognized it as Jonah's. "Kayla, we need to talk. I know you're in there." A wave of guilt washed over her, mixing with the heat still raging inside her. She had wanted to avoid this. She didn't want to face him, didn't want to admit the truth that she knew he was probably already sensing. But she couldn't avoid him forever, not when he was the only one who could help her. She stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do, her thoughts conflicting with each other. Her pride told her to lock the door, push him away, and handle this on her own. But the other part of her, the part that had been dying for release, yearned for him. She knew that if she didn't face this now, it would only consume her further. Kayla stepped forward and opened the door, the cool air from the hallway rushing in and mixing with the heat that clung to her skin. Jonah stood there, his tall frame filling the doorway, his face etched with concern and determination. He looked as if he had been waiting for this moment, his eyes scanning her face for any sign of what was happening inside. "You're not fine, Kayla," Jonah said quietly, his voice steady despite the concern that laced it. "You don't have to go through this alone." Kayla swallowed hard. She wanted to push him away, but his presence, his strength, felt like a beacon in the storm raging inside her. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken tension. "I didn't want to worry anyone," Kayla finally whispered, her voice shaky. "I didn't want to appear weak." Jonah shook his head, stepping into the room without waiting for an invitation. He closed the door behind him, his gaze never leaving her face. "You're not weak, Kayla. You're just human." His words were soft, but they held a weight she hadn't expected. "Whatever this is, whatever's happening to you, we can figure it out together. I won't let you face it alone." Kayla felt a lump form in her throat as her heart twisted. She wanted to scream, to throw herself into his arms and let him take it all away. But she couldn't. She was a soldier, trained to be strong, to resist. Yet in the face of Jonah's kindness, her resolve was beginning to crack. The heat within her grew, overwhelming every rational thought. She took a deep breath, trying to push it down, but it surged again, stronger than before. The need, the desire, it was consuming her, filling her every thought. Her body ached for something she couldn't control. Jonah stepped closer, his hand reaching out gently to touch her arm. The moment his skin brushed hers, Kayla's breath hitched, and she felt herself tremble under the intensity of the sensation. Her body, it seemed, had already made its decision. She couldn't fight it anymore. "Jonah," she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know what's happening to me." Jonah's eyes softened, and without another word, he pulled her into his arms. For a moment, Kayla froze, every nerve in her body screaming for release, for something, anything, to ease the aching fire inside her. Then, without thinking, she kissed him. The kiss was electric, full of urgency and need, and as their lips met, Kayla knew she had crossed a line that could never be undone. The fire in her exploded, and for the first time since this all started, she felt relief. But as they pulled away, panting, Kayla's mind raced. She had let herself go, and in doing so, she had exposed her deepest vulnerability. She was no longer sure if she could hold back, if she even wanted to. Jonah's presence was now a constant pull on her soul, and as much as she told herself she could handle this alone, she realized that this battle was no longer hers to fight alone. Jonah looked at her, his face full of understanding, but also something more, something Kayla couldn't quite place. "I'm not going anywhere, Kayla," he whispered. "We'll get through this, together." And for the first time in what felt like forever, Kayla believed him. The days following that intense moment with Jonah felt like they existed in a strange limbo for Kayla. The ship's usual hum, the routine, tasks, the casual conversations, everything seemed distant and out of focus as she tried to gather her thoughts. She had crossed a line, and though part of her regretted it, another part, the part that had been yearning for release, felt strangely free. For the first time since the effects of the serum had started, Kayla felt a sense of balance returning, albeit a fragile one. She was still wrestling with the aftermath of the encounter with Jonah, but the overwhelming intensity of her emotions had dulled, at least for the moment. She woke up early one morning, the bright blue of space outside her, small window casting a calm, serene light into her quarters. The fire inside her, though still there, had settled into a smoldering ache. It no longer raged with the same furious intensity. The relief was temporary, but Kayla knew she couldn't ignore the reality that the serum's effects were far from over. Her thoughts turned immediately to Jonah. After the moment they shared in her quarters, he had kept his distance, respecting her space as she grappled with what had happened. But Kayla knew they couldn't keep avoiding what had unfolded between them. The bond that had always existed between them, quiet and understated, had shifted irrevocably. She could feel it in the way Jonah looked at her now, his gaze softer, more protective. He wasn't the same, and neither was she. Kayla stood from her bed and walked to the mirror, taking in her reflection with a mix of uncertainty and determination. Her blue skin, though still radiant, looked slightly more flushed than usual. Her once controlled appearance now seemed a little wilder, less put together. She touched her hair, its soft silken strands falling over her shoulders, and sighed. She had always been the one to hide behind her strength, to mask her vulnerabilities behind a cool, unshakable exterior. But now, she wasn't so sure she could keep pretending everything was fine. Her fingers grazed the communicator on her desk once again, and for the first time in a while she didn't hesitate to reach for it. She needed to speak to Jonah. They needed to talk, really talk, about what had happened, about what was happening, and about how they could move forward from here. When the comms link established a connection, Jonah's face appeared on the screen, his expression as calm as ever, though Kayla could see the faint tension in his shoulders. She couldn't blame him. She had left him in the dark about so much, and after everything that had transpired, he must have been struggling with his own thoughts. She had never seen him quite like this. Not vulnerable, not uncertain. "Kayla." Jonah's voice was warm, but there was an underlying hesitation. "Are you okay?" Kayla looked at him, her heart beating in her chest. She wanted to say everything, to pour out the words that had been swirling in her mind, but she wasn't sure where to begin. So instead, She simply nodded, though the lingering weight in her chest told her that nothing was as it seemed. "I'm better," she said quietly. "But we need to talk, Jonah." He nodded, understanding immediately. "I agree. I've been giving you space, Kayla, but I can't keep pretending that everything is the same. Not after what happened." Kayla swallowed. She had hoped that this conversation would be straightforward, but as she met his eyes through the screen, she realized it was anything but. There was too much between them now. Too much unspoken, too many emotions that they had yet to unpack. And she wasn't sure if she was ready for it, but she couldn't ignore it any longer. "I've been thinking about everything," Kayla started, her voice barely above a whisper. "About the serum, about how it affected me and how it changed everything. I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't want it, but now that it's here, I don't know how to move forward." Jonah's face softened as he listened, his brow furrowing in concern. "Kayla, none of this is your fault. The serum, it was out of our control, but that doesn't mean we can't handle it. You don't have to face this alone." Kayla's heart skipped a beat at his words, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to believe him. Maybe they could face this together. Maybe they could find a way to navigate the complexities that had been thrust upon them. "But what about us?" Kayla asked, her voice trembling slightly. "What does this mean for us, Jonah? After everything that's happened, how do we even begin to make sense of it?" Jonah's expression shifted, and for the first time since they'd spoken, Kayla saw a flicker of something real, something raw in his eyes. He was no longer the commanding officer, no longer the one who had to keep his emotions in check. Now, he was just Jonah, the man who had been there for her through thick and thin, the man who had shared something deep and personal with her. "Kayla," Jonah said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "What happened between us, what we shared, it wasn't a mistake, it was real, and I'm not going to pretend that it didn't change things, but I'm not going anywhere. I can't. I want to figure this out with you." Kayla's chest tightened as she listened to him. She had always feared that the connection they shared would be lost, buried under the weight of their roles, their duties, and the chaos of their missions. But hearing Jonah's words, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, made her realize that there was something more between them. Something that neither of them had ever fully acknowledged. "I don't know what the future holds," Kayla said softly, her voice catching in her throat. "But I know that I don't want to face it without you." Jonah smiled, a warmth spreading across his face. He leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "Then let's face it together. Whatever comes next, we'll handle it. We always have." Kayla's heart swelled with relief, and in that moment she finally allowed herself to believe it. She had been so afraid of losing control, afraid of the unknown, afraid of being vulnerable. But now, standing here with Jonah, she realized that maybe the greatest strength lay in letting herself trust him, and trust in the bond they shared. Together they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they would overcome the uncertainty, the doubts, and the fear, and together they would build a future, one that wasn't defined by the past, but by the love and commitment they had for each other. As they continued their conversation, Kayla felt a new sense of purpose, a quiet determination building inside her. The fire that had once consumed her was no longer something to fear. It was part of who she was, part of the journey that had led her to this moment. And now, with Jonah by her side, she was ready to face whatever the future held. The universe was vast and there would always be challenges, but for the first time, Kayla knew she wasn't alone. And that made all the difference.